Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I have no idea how this breakout thing works. Um,
We're just going to pause for a second as Albert finishes up the webinar on the other side, and then I will re-engage in conversation with more folks as they join over here.
okay, sounds good.
um, in hosting just our webinar license. So I would say the answer is
Hey, Anthony, do you have everything you need for the breakout?
I do. Thanks, Adam, for checking in.
You bet.
Fire hydrant, getting information. So, I don't know, it might be better to spend time with somebody else on our staff that also has information. It's busy, but you know, there are other people that, you know, this is really.
Hello, good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple minutes for folks to join us as the other webinar is just wrapping up right now. Thank you for joining our session here today. All right, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Anthony Tran. I'm the director of the University Events Office here at UC San Diego. My department functions underneath Student Affairs and Student Life, and I largely work with our undergraduate student population to produce events for students, along with students as we help student organizations, associated students, concerts, and events produce everything from food truck rallies to the Sun God Festival, as well as a number of other campus traditions, including Convocation. And I welcome you all this morning and thank you for joining our session here today. I really want to make sure that we're able to have a conversation. So I'm just going to introduce a couple of quick thoughts to get us going as a group. And then I will unmute folks and give everyone the opportunity to share their experiences, ask their questions as it relates to platforms. And I think where I would first like to start this meeting is really thinking about what we're trying to accomplish when conceptualizing and visualizing a virtual event space. I oftentimes, when meeting with departments or student organizations, oftentimes I try to identify and isolate what are the overarching goals that we are trying to accomplish when producing an event. I think in this virtual world, events have a much more amorphous sense. You know, in some ways we're creating content. Is it about creating a great video that a student or a patron can see at their own time and likely and open opportunity? Or are we really trying to create a singular unifying sort of experience that when you come into the meeting, it's live, it's an opportunity to interact with talent, to have engaging conversation with an author or a panelist of some sort. So I think to firstly start this conversation, it's important to, in the talking and conversation about platforms, it's worth identifying that there's really two parallel train tracks. The platform really refers to how, the distribution method, in what ways do we want to direct someone to a location, a hyperlink, or some sort of application. The other very important element is the content creation. I think some of that was touched upon by Albert and Adam as we've set up the studio within the loft space to really create some high quality video and audio, and thinking about what sort of story or narrative that you're trying to tell will influence the platform and vice versa. More often than not, I would encourage you to look at your overarching goals and look at your content before trying to choose a platform. I think in our takeaway from the spring and what I'm hearing more often than not, engaging content is engaging content. Students will seek out whatever platform it is, whether it be Twitch or a application or Zoom, so long as they are interested in the speaker, the content, they will go to it irregardless of where that is being directed. And so I think that's a great starting point for us to really consider. And a little bit of background of where I've been spending my spring and early summer. I was tasked with a small work group to try to pursue and identify what sort of virtual platforms and tools are out there. We have come across a number of them that sounded interesting, and the more digging we do, the more we realize that those tools are available to us either for free through Vimeo, through things that currently exist on campus, or quite simply, Zoom has really emerged as the industry leader. We work really closely with some pretty prominent entertainment industries, and all of them tout Zoom as really their preferred method of delivery for speakers, authors, musicians. So it was really surprising to see that, but I think we are also cognizant that we do get a fair amount of Zoom and gloom and that sense of Zoom burnout. And so I think it's a very tricky balance from knowing that it's a very powerful, robust platform, but also thinking about what sort of content we're trying to present. And I would say in my work with AS Conference and Events, some of the most popular events that they did were on the Zoom platform with much less success across Instagram Live, Facebook Live, and Twitch. And so those are the two areas that I think are worth identifying, talking about content and content production, and then opening the door to talk about platforms. So I wanted to first open up and see if folks had any questions, things that they're struggling through and trying to digest as we are adapting and adjusting to this new virtual world and programming for a hybrid campus where we may have 10 to 15,000 students that live on our UC San Diego campus, but most will be consuming in a virtual format due to restrictions on venues and gathering spaces. So I will pause here and open up to folks that might have some questions for this, for the group.
Hi, Anthony. I have a question.
Hey.
Hey, so as we think about coming into fall and student leadership retreats and trainings, and we typically, do how to plan an event 101, obviously all of our training materials no longer are useful because we need to kind of retrain them. And I was just wondering from your committee if you have any resources or information you can share as we all work to develop event planning in the virtual world trainings for fall.
That's a really good note. I think as events continue to take a lot of different shape, it's hard to really say what a virtual event is these days. When we are continuing to develop this, one of the pieces of advice I would advise different departments is to really consider multiple platforms. So engagement may take the form of a Slack channel with a multifaceted Zoom breakout. So similar to what we see today with the webinar by SEP, we have a common area and then a breakout opportunity where we switch from unidirectional broadcast, meaning it's simply folks that are telegraphing out the message, and then opportunities for students to connect, or in this case, have a breakout session for deeper, more robust conversations. So what I might consider is we can certainly sidebar and talk through some best practices. I know Special Events and Protocol has developed some best practices when presenting a webinar, but in terms of producing an event, I think it always starts first with the very student affairs. Start with your goals, and from there, I think we're able to flesh that out further. And then I see a question from Debbie. It says, I have a problem with Zoom when hosting iCafe. For example, problems with dual monitors and getting PowerPoint to open full screen on the right monitor. Do we have anyone on campus who can help with Zoom questions or issues? There's actually a number of folks that might be able to help answer that question with you. I know Special Events and Protocol, Marketing and Communications, as well as our office, the University Events Office, has had a lot of success in hosting these webinars. And oftentimes what's helpful in this is having some sort of second or third monitor, in this case, where you are able to throw that to. I think oftentimes when hosting a conversation with talent, we would have our moderator, we would have our talent, and then we would have a third person that's really running behind the scenes where we're really able just to share that monitor. I would be happy to connect with you after this event, along with our production manager, Nelson, who can help advise through some of these logistics issues when it comes to getting PowerPoint and really just getting the seamless flow from one panelist to another. All right, are there some other folks that are trying to puzzle through what fall and winter events might really look like? If not, I can share some insight on some of the platforms that we have looked at to see what sort of interests folks might have. So I'll pause real quick to see if anyone had questions on how they're looking at presenting their fall programs.
Anthony, it's Ben. I think I had one question that kind of relates to maybe what you were just going into, but one of the points of feedback we've heard from students a lot is sort of the Zoom fatigue or the virtual fatigue. Have you found any platforms, maybe aside from Zoom, that maybe allow for some more connection, or at least the feeling of more connection that students have responded well to?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Zoom fatigue, I do believe is very real. I think most of us spend our days connecting with our staff and our colleagues via Zoom, and just be able to host an event for students can feel very draining. I think it starts first with building the events from the core up and trying to think about what it is that we hope to achieve through the Zoom itself. And so in some ways, it may be about they may not respond to the fact that they're just being spoken to, a presenter or a musician that's just playing music. It may be about rebuilding that event to focus in on the conversational piece. What we have found is amongst our students, they really gravitate towards the chat function and feature, that really becomes an event within the event. And in some places, that's totally appropriate. In others, where we're having deep conversations about climate change or how to combat anti-Blackness, it may not be as positive or an easy conversation to facilitate through chat. And so I think in many ways, when we look at this, the questions become are you trying to create a live event? And that's where Zoom can be very powerful, is creating a live event. Or is it more passive content that would just need to be hosted on a YouTube or Vimeo? Or in some ways, is it about breaking it out of the traditional hour or 2-hour mindset and giving snippets throughout the day? That it might be an Instagram or social media takeover with your talent, where you're providing little bits of content throughout the course of the day, as opposed to one large hour or 2-hour traditional style events. And so now that we're in this virtual space, I've seen folks such as UC Santa Barbara. They had someone that performed on our campus who did an arena concert, Sweetie, and Sweetie ended up doing an Instagram takeover for their social media accounts for the student government. And so it was a way to engage students throughout the day. And then in the end, it culminated with one larger concert. And so that's one way to kind of change the fact that, oh, you're not just being scheduled for another meeting. It's something that you want to go towards because you were given breadcrumbs all day, and now you want to consume the overall program. So in terms of physical platforms itself, very few met the needs or were just window dressing on top of Zoom. A lot of what we discovered were companies that said they could do all these things. They would integrate registration with networking and chat. And at the end of the day, when we really, really looked at it, they were just reskinning Zoom. That Zoom actually lives underneath all of the other prettier textures and layers. And so, for example, vFairs has come up quite a bit. The backbone of vFairs and their video broadcasting actually is Zoom. So it's not that other folks are doing it any different. It's just the way in which it's being packaged. And then I'm trying to look through some of the questions here. One of the questions is, does the campus have institutional licenses we can use? For example, Mentimeter or Kahoot? At this time, no. In our search for these various platforms, we were trying to find what sorts of platforms might have that larger enterprise license, but because they're relatively inexpensive at that campus-wide level, it seemed to make more sense that each individual department would pursue. But I think these are certainly suggestions that we might be able to float on over towards Adam and Albert, that we might ask if university centers would be open to sharing a license similar to the Zoom platform. And then there's another question about what has been the best platform for music performances that don't compress the sound, essentially removing the highs and lows like Zoom does. I think, again, that would depend on what your needs are. If you are talking about synchronous or asynchronous video, if this is meant to be a live stream or something that's pre-produced and pre-recorded. I think what we're seeing a lot more in the entertainment industry are folks that are recording a live set and they're presenting it as if it were live, but it's not in fact live. And so in many situations like that, I've seen it presented very well over Vimeo. And then there's opportunities to upgrade Vimeo for a relatively small fee for a pro license. Again, the campus does not have something of that scale, but I think if we continue to generate a shared common interest, that may be something that is worth floating to our leadership teams to discuss whether or not student affairs should have a license of that, or maybe that's something, again, we can fold into university centers. And then I see a question about, I can use some tips on best practices or tricks for engagement in a Zoom meeting. Has anyone found best marketing platforms to get highest participation? This is a fantastic question. I really appreciate this question, Debbie. I think what we're seeing a lot is mixed use. So oftentimes we are finding that marketing will find its way much different into these events than they would live in-person events. And so I think what we're seeing a lot of success with are things like giveaways, opportunity drawings that exist within the event. So before, it might be share this post and you would qualify for a raffle. But instead, what we're finding is that putting that in the middle of an event, putting together Mentimeters where there's active participation has worked really well for more of the meeting setting. But I think a lot of it starts too with who you're selecting for your content, how engaging they are. I've worked with a number of different groups, from Binging with Babish, a very popular YouTube channel. And we worked with our associated students, concerts and events to produce an event where he essentially did a cooking show, but we knew that a cooking show could only run so far. And so there was a question and answer element with the talent. There was a behind the scenes studio tour of his kitchen space and a walkthrough of his favorite appliance and gadgets. And those sorts of changing and moving the camera around has certainly helped. And then I think just being dynamic with what your camera angles can be. As we saw with the webinar earlier within the loft, just being able to switch from camera A to camera B to camera C, back to camera A, adds a lot to how dynamic an event can possibly be. And so I think with Zoom, I would oftentimes put out there, how long does your event need to be? With traditional events, we were always concerned about getting folks through screening, in through the doors, making sure that we could scan tickets. And so you had your traditional buffer time as people walked in, you had an opener, a direct support, and a headliner. And I think in this day of a virtual environment where Zoom burnout is real, the ability to condense down and really reimagine how long an event needs to be in a virtual space can really matter. And then the opportunity to produce it once and publish it everywhere, that's the COPE model. There's always an opportunity to then host this for later engagements for folks to consume at a later point in time. Are there some other questions that I might be able to have, or maybe if I can throw it out there, where have folks found success in their spring and early summer programming? Feel free to share with us what you found worked really well.
Hi, Anthony. Is this where we talk, or are we supposed to put it in the chat?
No, yes, please chat, or please speak out.
Like a human. I host the iCafe, which is a takeoff on the International Friday Cafe, which has been around UC San Diego for about 50 years. And of course, we had to jump into a new virtual iCafe, which stands for International Cafe, in case people don't know it. So I've had to make it up, which has been a lot of fun. I appreciate any and all suggestions. What I'm finding, because it's a moving target, at least for me, my learning curve is a moving target, that's for sure. I've had issues probably on my end, personally, getting the Zoom thing to work right. When I brought in my second monitor, I totally screwed that up. I recorded my PowerPoint, and now my PowerPoint has these black boxes throughout it, like it's been redacted. It's like, what happened? Where did that come from? So I don't even know who to reach out for things like that to get some help. But for iCafe, as it's morphed, it's a 1 hour on Fridays. It's a lunchtime thing. And where I'm at now, in case this helps other people, is, well, certainly it's an opportunity for creativity, but I've now created within that hour to keep from the boredom is like 4 different segments where I have a cultural ambassador segment, and I even have one faculty comes on, and we travel to countries where our study abroad department hosts global seminars. So that gives me my theme for a different international country each week. And then I collaborated with Extension, have the awesome Shaylee, if you know Shaylee, awesome. She does travel trivia and then gives a gift card for that. So she hosts that 10-minute segment. And now I've partnered with Rec, and they're doing a global playground as a takeoff on their summer playground. So they come into that iCafe and do a 10-minute segment, either on that or maybe sometimes even a food segment. And I have another 10-minute segment, which is called the Cook Club instead of a book club. And I mail them on Friday Cafe apron. I just ordered all these new aprons for my volunteers, and then we shut it down. So I've tried to, to really switch it up so people just don't come in for 10 minutes and leave. And the travel trivia, which somehow Shaylee still has her free 2-week version on Kahoot. So that's engaging. Sometimes I do when I have a country, and every week I have to fill an hour on that country. If I don't have enough, like 2 cultural ambassadors, I'll put the map up and I'll do the annotation. To like when we went to India, the first annotation was put a check mark if you've been here. And I had been to India. So people kind of checked around the country, and I said, now put a heart if you want to go there. So this segment happened after our cultural ambassador. So they were, in theory, people were excited about going. So then people use the annotation button and put hearts around India where they thought, oh, this would be a cool place to go. So that's the hard part for me, is kind of inventing a new live program each week that you don't just sit and stare at, you participate in. We peppered the chat box with who's done this. And by the way, we try to entice students because you get CCR credit by attending 1 hour of iCafe. It's a newish thing. I think it started on campus last year, but they get something co-curricular record credit if you have 30 hours. So for example, if you attend all the iCafes in an academic year, that's going on your academic record as a co-curricular thing that you did. So I mean, always trying to entice them, you know, and creating a new audience each week for an hour, it's tricky. And certainly my learning curve is steep, trying to not screw up the Zoom. I'm done.
Thank you for sharing that, Debbie. And I do know that there is a virtual campus collective that's helping a number of groups transition, and that may be a good resource for you. I will drop my email into this chat just so that we can further connect you to additional resources. Because I think what we are doing and really hoping to achieve together is that we're all puzzling through this. Very few of us come from a television or internet production sort of background where we know that you know, for some sorts of programs, you know, if we're doing chamber music, audio matters. That's it's not simple enough to say that, oh, Zoom works and that's just enough to get that out to the world. That there may be needs to compromise in different areas, but I think as we work to puzzle through these different sorts of events, how we are able to facilitate chat rooms, how we're able to have after conversations and continue to share with each other. I welcome and appreciate those opportunities. So I will drop my email in, and then I will try to find information on that virtual collective to share out to this group as well. Jesse, I know that you just mentioned some unboxing and some care packages that you sent out to students. Are you in a position to share what you did for Concoction?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm glad you asked because I've been getting a lot of messages that I've been trying to answer to people. In fact, hold on, I have it right here. So we work with College Wear, and this is the box that we sent out for Concoction. You'll see it's this big. So Concoction is our music festival, and in this box is a t-shirt, a mask. We were supposed to get hand sanitizer, but surprise, surprise, they were back ordered when we got them in the spring, but you can do custom hand sanitizer. A little postcard that has a message to our students, and we sent these out to all of our students. So this box was about, we sent 300 of them. Obviously, the more you send, the cheaper they'll be. Was about $24. All the custom merchandise inside, plus $10 to ship it. It's pretty much depending on, I've done now multiple boxes. It's $10 for local shipping and $35 to ship internationally. I know a lot of the colleges are doing welcome packages for orientation and are shipping internationally, and it's about $35 per person to ship. But I've had a really great experience working with College Wear. They even went to Costco and got me chocolate bars to put in the packages, and they'll work with you. You can put stickers. We found that, you know, we've invited different offices in our department to include information that they want to ship to new students that don't weigh anything, so they won't add to the shipping costs. So for orientation, different departments and student organizations or student government, student council and things like that are including stickers and low weight items. So students loved it. They were able to register. For orientation, we'll be sending everybody these, but when we did it for the concert in the spring, it was just the first come, first serve, first 300. So that's an example of what that looked like. I was surprised they could make it so small.
Thank you for
Jesse.
sharing that.
Sorry, this is Taylor. Can I just ask a follow-up question of Jesse?
Yeah, go ahead.
Jesse, when you said first come, first serve, is it just everybody who registered, or how did you determine doing that and getting the right addresses, or did you already have
Yes.
kind of a closed Great.
So yeah, so we, the address thing, I learned a good trick for the second time around. So we just did a Google form and we said the first 300, these packages were only open to 6 college students because they were being, that's where I work, and the money was being paid for by 6 college student council. So we had a Google form and it was the first 300 people to sign up. I highly recommend if you use that format. We could have used like Eventbrite and such, but we just found the Google form was easy because it made a really digestible Excel sheet we could then just send directly to CollegeWare. But put an example of how you want the address written. Otherwise, you will get so many different ones. People won't put their zip codes, and it's just a mess. So put an example of how exactly you want the address written. And then the sort of time-consuming part on the back end, I just split it up between me and some staff members. We did look up to verify that they were students and 6 college students, to make sure that they were, going to the right folks. But that's how we did it. Again, you could probably get a lot more fancy, but we found a Google form to be really easy. And then we literally just sent that exact form to CollegeWare to develop all the shipping. And I had, out of 300 packages, I think I had 1 or 2 with some issues. But I think that's pretty good right now, just as far as how much difficulty UPS and things like that are having.
Thank you. And it sounds like CollegeWare did all of the materials and packing and shipping for you.
Yeah, that's the thing. We didn't want to go to campus. We didn't want any in-person things for us, especially this is in the spring, right when everything was happening. So they did everything. So we sent them, they created the stickers, the postcards, the shirts, everything that we needed, and they package and assemble and send out everything in their warehouse in Poway. So I did everything from my computer. And then you can pay them, they're an approved vendor, they're licensed, and you can pay them with a PO from, well, not everybody uses
whatever
this.
the current.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I know that we're coming up a little close to time, so I did want to share some other crucial learned points that we have discovered as we went through this process. There is a large emphasis, and this is a primary area of focus for our Chief Information Officer as well as the Chancellor. It is worth noting that if anyone's looking at pursuing off-the-shelf sort of platforms that are north of $10,000, that is all getting vetted at the CIO level. And so there is a lot of concern now that we are in this virtual space, what's happening with student data, how well that's managed. I will say that a lot of the enterprise level platforms that we found for virtual conferences, virtual fairs, a lot of them have lead times north of 10 weeks. So if you're looking at producing a virtual fair with one of these platforms, we've, for example, with Convocation, have been engaged in contracting conversations for more than 3 weeks, and their typical lead time is 12 to 13 weeks out. We are finding that all of these virtual platforms are relatively inundated with just expansive growth. So most of the folks that we talk to, even the sales teams that we've struggled to even get a hold of, there's a lot of concern with if it's taking this long to get a sales call back, how long and can they actually deliver on a lot of these products. And so I will say I've seen a fair number of product demonstrations of various engaging sort of virtual environments, virtual platforms. I would say a fair amount of that could be replicated with schools on campus. And a lot of those are just window dressing on Zoom. So I do add a lot of caution. I don't mean to take away from their value, because I think a lot of what the value of something like a VFairs or easy virtual fairs or campus groups is that they do have this great template. It helps ease the learning curve. And it's not about creating a custom, well-designed website on our end, things that a lot of us don't have in our wheelhouse. Oftentimes, we don't have a webmaster at our disposal to simply come up and whip up a new website. So I do express a fair amount of caution when engaging with third-party groups. I think many are emerging. A lot of them are adopting what would have been companion applications or companion websites to in-person conferences. Those are now being sold as more online virtual events. We've seen folks that traditionally just do registration now add registration for an online sort of conference. I'm happy to share much more of that information, but unfortunately that was not as fruitful of a search. We did go through about 40 different platforms, and many of which had their either financial challenges where it was just going to be unobtainable, or they were just simply at capacity. And a question that I oftentimes get is in regards to music licensing, how and when we can use artist music and the work that we do. That is an ongoing conversation that I have with our campus risk management, with our procurement folks, campus council, as well as UCOP. What I would say is there are some known platforms that have issues. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube are very, very commonly flagging videos that have that sort of content. And so those are not great places to host content. You know, at the end of the day, our license specifically says that if it originates from a UC San Diego source, so a .ucsc.edu sort of address, or at least the appearance of, that's really where our license covers us. For things like closed Zoom calls, things on more platforms that are closed environments, I think there's some room to really apply that there, but I would express some level of caution when publicizing more broadly out to the world, especially if it's accessible to the general public, and especially if there's a monetizing sort of factor to it. So anytime that you could potentially profit or make money from the use of copyright music, that's typically where that gets enforced at a more legal level. But there are tiers of escalation. More often than not, the first would be a disrupted stream or a pulled video, a pause on some sort of account. It may escalate to a cease and desist, and then if it continues to persist, that may find itself in more of a legal sort of conversation. But at least so that we all know, there are tiers of escalation for that. So I would not immediately be concerned that it's the use of it directly results in sort of a lawsuit. I do have some questions here about the findings. I can certainly reach out to you, Suzette, and share more about what we discovered there. There are some notes that were more directed towards internal pieces, but I can certainly make a more publicized version, if only to have what those are. But again, the lens or focus that I was looking at was through, did it seem appropriate at an enterprise level for the campus? And that's where most of these did not actually meet that criteria, but it may in fact meet criteria for an individual unit or department. And then the last question is about Zoom bombing and whether in video, audio, or chat. We've been very fortunate to not have that, but typically when we are producing events, we are producing it through the webinar format. So we are specifically calling or highlighting speakers up to share their screen or to actually speak over to everyone else. Within the chat, less so. We do preface all of our events with that this is a UC San Diego sanctioned event, that we ask that all folks adhere to the principles of community, and that those that do not may find themselves removed from the event. We keep that at the beginning, and then there's at least usually one of us that monitors the chat of this. But again, it can be a little bit tricky depending on what the conversation is. And I think Zoom bombing can be mitigated through the webinar format as opposed to the meeting format of Zoom. But we've also found that for highly divisive speakers, in the case of Andrew Yang, I know that University Centers essentially disabled the chat, but still allowed for Q&A to happen. So the speakers and the panelists could see the Q&As, but the rest of the folks could not. So they knew by bringing in a political speaker that that may bring up some challenges. And so that's how they mitigated that and minimized it while still facilitating interactions and questions directed at their speaker, Andrew Yang. I know that we are coming up on time, so I did want to put my email out there. It's quite simply anthony@ucsc.edu, and I will be available throughout the summer to talk more about platforms, to help puzzle through any sort of questions folks have as it comes to virtual events. And I hope you all the best as we try to work through this together. And I think as we continue to learn more, you know, spring was a whirlwind for us. We learned quite a bit. We had our stumbles. We had our very, very low attended events. So for every event that we had 300 or 400, we had several that were in the couple dozens, 30 to 40. And so sometimes it's not just about who you pick, but you know, how it's marketed and just how the students are that day. You know, I think at the end of the day, we know that we're not competing with what's going on in the ballroom or the loft anymore. We're competing about we're competing with Animal Crossing, we're competing with YouTube and what's happening with Reddit. And so the world is a lot more competitive to get our students for their engagement. So I appreciate you all, and I appreciate the hard work that you and your teams are doing to help engage our students and really create this virtual environment until we can be back in a safe space. So thank you. And if you have any questions, my email's in the chat, and I appreciate you all today. Thank you.